Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. I apologize. I can't welcome everybody by name who hopefully have written their names in the comments and are watching. What's going on is that the internet is down in our whole neighborhood. So I've got a totally jury-rigged system going here, going through my cellular phone. And I hope that the bandwidth of my cell phone is enough to carry the feed in its entirety. And if you put comments and questions into in the comments, Nina's monitoring that on her phone. And then towards the end of the class, she'll print that out and slip me a piece of paper so I can answer questions. But normally I'm monitoring the show and I can see that people are watching, how many are watching, if there's comments, etc. I can't see that today, so I apologize in advance. And Nina, if this thing is just not working at all, you'll let me know. But if it is, then onward. We're just gonna muddle through and do our daf against all odds. It's just so frustrating. It really shows how dependent we are on our Wi-Fi connection. I mean, it's ridiculous. But yeah, the whole neighborhood is down. Probably somebody was doing construction somewhere a few blocks away and cut the wire for AT&T. And, the neighborhood chat through our cell phones. We were like, when's it going to come back? When's it coming back? When's it coming back? But we'll muddle through, and I did not want to miss teaching our class just because of a Wi-Fi issue in the neighborhood. So since I haven't heard different, I assume we're streaming, and let's do this. And again, I apologize I couldn't welcome everybody personally like I usually do. I also noticed that I forgot, and all being so verklempt, to bring the bell and to bring the candle. But let us light up the darkness with Torah. That's always going to be brighter than any candle. Okay, our daf today is page 35 here in Tractate Shevuos, the 26th volume of the Talmud, continuing our journey through chapter 4, and we open right now with Mishna 5, which God willing will complete, and also open Mishna 6. Okay, Mishna 5 of chapter 4, Tractate Shevuos. If one said to witnesses, I adjure you concerning your refusal to testify, if you do not come and testify on my behalf, that so-and-so said he is going to give me 200 dinars, and he did not give them to me. Right? So what he's saying is, he's adjuring, he's making the witness swear. If the witness refuses and says, I have no knowledge of it, that's why he's calling for an oath. This is the oath of testimony. But the underlying matter that the witnesses witnessed is not going to work in the oath of testimony context, right? So if he said, come and testify for me that I lent 200 dinars to Reuben, and now he's claiming that I didn't lend it, so please come be my witnesses. And if these people say, what are you talking about? We didn't see that. And you're like, swear an oath that you didn't see it. And then hopefully if they actually did see it and they don't want to be liable for swearing a false oath, they'll come to court and testify on my behalf that they saw me make this loan. But I'm not claiming in this Mishnah that you witnessed me giving a loan to Reuven. I'm claiming that you heard Reuven say to me that he was going to give me a gift of 200 dinars. Not that you witnessed him giving it, but that you witnessed him saying that he would give me a gift. Now, if I say to you, I promise to give you a gift of something, is that a contract? Is that something you can rely on? Have I lost the right to take back such a promise? Keep listening. So in a case where one says to a witness, I adjure you, if you do not come and testify on my behalf that so-and-so said he's going to give me 200 dinars, and then he did not give them to me. And so these people now say, we don't know anything about that, even though they do know it. They did witness this statement. So they take a false oath that they have no knowledge of the matter, and it turns out it really did happen, and they're lying that they have no knowledge of the matter. Are they guilty of swearing a false oath of testimony? No. They would be exempt from liability to bring an offering for taking a false oath of testimony, as one is liable for taking a false oath of testimony only in a case involving a monetary claim, like a deposit, in the sense that they were the witnesses to testify that if they were to testify, the individual would be liable to pay. Right? That's why if they witness that I lent Reuven 200 dinars and now he's claiming I didn't lend it to him, and so they come and give testimony that no, in fact, I did lend him 200 dinars, then he would become liable to pay me the 200 dinars as a result of the witnesses giving their testimony. But in this case, where they heard him say a promise that he's going to give me and then he didn't give me, in the case of a promise to give a gift, he could claim that he merely reconsidered. Doesn't matter what the witnesses saw. He's not obligated to give me a gift, and even though he said he would give me a gift, later he can change his mind. Who knows what happened in between when he made the promise and when he didn't. Now you could talk about in the realm of contract law, reliance, right? That because he promised to give me 200 dinars, I relied on that promise and committed myself to something else. But that's not a Torah concept. We don't use that, right? They can only testify about a deposit, right? There was no deposit here. There was only a promise to give. He could reconsider. So even if the testimony were true, it wouldn't force him to pay me the 200 dinars. And since the testimony would not yield that kind of money changing hands, it's not considered a case of monetary law. And therefore, even if they testified falsely, they wouldn't become liable to bring the offering. Next case. If one said to witnesses, I adjure you, right, or I administer an oath to you, that when you will know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. These witnesses are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony, even if they do not testify, due to the fact that the oath preceded their knowledge of the relevant testimony. Right? When I say come testify on my behalf, and if you don't know, and if you claim you don't know anything on my behalf, then I make you swear an oath. Well, that's only after you witnessed something that I need you to come and testify about. I can't make you swear an oath that in the future, if you ever witness something that is relevant to me in a case that I might bring in court, that you will give that testimony. Such an oath is meaningless because there is no testimony to swear about at the time that I am adjuring you. Next case. If one stood in the synagogue and said for all to hear, in other words, in a public place, I administer an oath to you, or meaning I adjure you, that if you know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. These witnesses are exempt until he directs his demand to specific individuals. You can't make the public swear. Only someone that you have reason to believe witness what you need him to testify about, and you direct your call to, your adjuration, right? Adjuring him, making him swear an oath if he's going to deny, if he's not going to come forward and give the testimony freely. Only in a case where there's a specific person who we have reason to believe has such testimony to give. Next case, if one said to two people, I adjure you so and so and so and so, okay, now he's directing this, forcing the oath to two specific people, that if you know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. And they respond, on our oath, we do not know any testimony relevant to you. And they do know testimony relevant to him, but the testimony is not based on an incident that they witnessed, but rather only on hearsay testimony, which is not valid testimony. Or if one of the witnesses is found to be a relative or otherwise disqualified, then these witnesses are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony because they are unfit witnesses. You can't give testimony about hearsay evidence, and you can't be a witness if one of the pair of the witnesses is related to the litigant, which would disqualify them. And the fifth case, the fifth case, if the plaintiff sent the demand for their testimony by means of his slave, or in a case where the defendant said to the witnesses, I administer an oath to you that if you know any testimony relevant to the plaintiff, that you will come and testify on his behalf, and they took a false oath that they have no knowledge of the matter, these witnesses are exempt. And we've seen this ruling before. They're exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony until they hear the demand to swear such an oath directly from the mouth of the plaintiff. Right? If there was no plaintiff, there would be no case. If he has a case and he needs witnesses to prove his case, then he has to ask the witnesses to testify. And if they claim they have no testimony to give and he wants them to swear an oath to that effect, that has to come directly from the mouth of the plaintiff to the witnesses. He can't send his slave as his representative. That's Mishnah number 5. Now the Gemara. The Gemara cites proof for the laws in the Mishnah that we've just read from verses in the Torah. Here's the proof. The sages taught, I administer an oath to you concerning your refusal to testify if you do not come and testify on my behalf, that so-and-so said that he's going to give me 200 dinars, he did not give them to me. In such a case, one might have thought that they would be liable for giving the false oath. Therefore, the verse states the term, shall sin, with regard to an oath of testimony, and the same phrase, shall sin, with regard to an oath on a deposit, in order to derive a verbal analogy. Right? We're going to learn now what are the elements of the oath of testimony from the oath of deposit. Here it is stated with regard to the oath of testimony, shall sin, in Leviticus 5:1. And there it is stated with regard to an oath on a deposit, shall sin, in Leviticus 5:21. And just as there with regard to an oath on a deposit, the verse is speaking only with regard to a monetary claim. And in a case where the plaintiff has a legitimate claim, so too here with regard to an oath of testimony, the verse is speaking only with regard to a valid monetary claim. And in a case where the plaintiff has a legitimate claim, in the case cited in the Baraisa and in the first clause of our Mishnah, the plaintiff does not have a legitimate claim. You can't sue someone because he promised to give you 200 dinars and then he changed his mind. That's not a valid claim. The Mishnah teaches, I administer an oath to you that when you will know testimony in the future that is relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. This is premature. You can't do that yet. The sages taught, so the sages taught about this. I administer an oath to you that when you will know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. In such a case, one might have thought that they would be liable. Therefore, the verse states, and he heard the voice of an oath, and he is a witness, or he saw, or he knew. Leviticus 5:1. Now, one is liable to bring an offering for a false oath only in a case where knowledge of the testimony preceded the oath, and not in a case where the oath preceded knowledge of the testimony. So one who's saying, swear an oath that if you ever know something that's relevant to me in a court case, that you will come forward, and if you don't have knowledge that you won't, like swearing such an oath now is meaningless because the case doesn't exist, the eyewitness testimony doesn't exist, they wouldn't know what they're swearing to say or not say. It is premature. Our Mishnah continues, if one stood in the synagogue and said for all to hear, I administer an oath to you that if you know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. Such witnesses are exempt. And Shmuel says that is the law, even if his witnesses were in that room among the people in the synagogue, right? Because he didn't verbalize his request that they come and testify or swear they have no knowledge if they refuse to testify. He didn't verbalize that to those witnesses specifically. He just addressed the whole room, which is filled with lots of people who are not witnesses to his case. And so even though the witnesses are in that room, since he didn't address them directly, and they swore, they would be exempt because it would be a meaningless oath. So the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? Otherwise, there would be no novel element in the law of the Mishnah. And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to cite this case only in a situation where he is standing right next to those witnesses, lest you say he is comparable to one who spoke to them directly, and those witnesses would be liable if they swore falsely. The Tana of our Mishnah teaches us that until he specifies to whom he is directing his demand, he does not render those witnesses obligated to take an oath of testimony. Right, so presumably, if he's standing in the synagogue and the only two people in the room with him are the actual witnesses, and he says, I adjure you to come and give testimony or swear that you don't know it, then it would work because it's irrelevant what building they're standing in. It says he's obviously talking to the ones who really are witnesses. It's when they're mixed in with other people who aren't witnesses that his statement would have no effect, and they would be exempt if they answered Amen. And the Gemara notes, this is also taught in a baraisa. If one saw a group of people standing and his witnesses were among them, and he said to the entire group, I administer an oath to you that if you know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf. In such a case, one might have thought that they would be liable. And the verse states, and he is a witness in Leviticus 5:1. And in this case, he did not specify his witnesses. Therefore, they are not liable. One might have thought that the law is the same, even if he said, I administer an oath to everyone who is standing here, that you will come and testify on my behalf. The verse states, and he is a witness. And in this case, although he spoke to a group, he specified his witnesses. Therefore, they would be liable. Right? If he says, I speak to everyone here, well, then he is addressing every person who's standing there. But if he just said, I address my witnesses, right, then, people don't know who in the room he's talking to, and he has not said that he is speaking to every person as part of that group. The Mishnah taught that if one said to two individuals, I administer an oath to you, and they know testimony that is relevant to him, but it is based on hearsay, or if one of the witnesses is found to be a relative or otherwise disqualified, then both members of the witness party are exempt. The Gemara cites that which the sages taught. If one said to two individuals, I administer an oath to you, so-and-so and so-and-so, that if you know testimony relevant to me, you will come and testify on my behalf, and they know testimony relevant to him, but is based on hearsay testimony, or if one of the witnesses is a relative or disqualified in such a case, one might have thought that they would be liable. Therefore, the verse states, if one does not state it, then he shall bear his iniquity. Right? When he actually knows testimony, doesn't give it, that his sin would be on him. But this teaches that it is with regard to those eligible for the statement of testimony that the verse is speaking, and not those who are not eligible. Therefore, if they're disqualified because they're related to one of the litigants, or they're disqualified because the only knowledge they have is through hearsay, then they are not qualified witnesses, and no matter what oath they swore or didn't swear, they would be exempt. The Mishnah teaches if the plaintiff sent the demand for their testimony by means of his slave, etc. And the sages taught if the plaintiff sent the demand for their testimony by means of his slave, or in a case where the defendant said to the witnesses, I administer an oath to you, the defendant, not the plaintiff, that's the issue, that if you know any testimony relevant to the plaintiff, that you will come and testify in his behalf. Might one have thought that they would be liable? And the verse states, if he does not state it, then he shall bear his iniquity. Therefore, they are not liable. And the Gemara asks, what is the biblical derivation that leads to that conclusion? And Rabbi Elazar said the derivation is based on the fact that it is written im lo yagid. In the verse, the word lo is spelled lamed vav aleph and interpreted as both not, the negative not, which is spelled lamed aleph, and the word to him, which is spelled lamed vav. Right? So because it's a slightly corrupted spelling, it kind of includes both meanings of no and to him. The words sound the same, lo, but lo aleph is a negative, lo vav is to him. Therefore, now it's going to include both meanings. So it is derived, if the witness who knows the testimony does not state it to the plaintiff, he shall bear his iniquity and he is liable. But if it does not state it to some other person than the plaintiff, who's the one who can call for that testimony, then he would be exempt because that was an inappropriate oath-taking situation. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 4. Now Mishnah number 6. The Mishnah discusses the formula of an oath of testimony. Right? Now we're going to talk about the precise words, right? Where if you don't say exactly, if he doesn't say that he swears before God that this is what happened, or he swears before God that he has no knowledge of what happened, that's an obvious oath. But what if he used language that was similar to the language of swearing, but not quite? Was an oath created? That's the issue we're going to ask now. If the plaintiff said to the witnesses, I administer an oath to you concerning your refusal to testify if you do not come and testify on my behalf, or even if he said, I command you, or I bind you, although he did not employ an unequivocal formula of an oath, these witnesses are liable for taking a false oath of testimony. This language is close enough to the language of an oath that if the witness used it and claiming he has no knowledge of the situation, when he does in fact have such knowledge, then he would have sworn an oath and he would have sworn false and be liable to bring the offering, the sin offering. If one administered the oath to the witnesses in the name of heaven and in the name of earth, these witnesses are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony, as that is not an oath in the name of God, which is what's required when we're talking about an oath. If one administered the oath to the witnesses in the name of Aleph Dalet, Aleph Dalet, Ad, what is that? That's not a name of God. But here they're using that kind of as an abbreviation. I'm teaching this. Normally I would not say a name of God unnecessarily, but this is the name of God that we often speak whenever we make a blessing, and that name is Adonai. Now what's interesting about Adonai is that the word technically means my Lord, right? My Lord. And you could use it for a human noble who has power over you, or just somebody you're going to make a term of tremendous respect. But normally, and in whatever particular context we're talking about, where it's obvious, like when somebody is saying, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, and they would have used that word that I just used, that name of God, that we are speaking about God. Right? So the question is now, when you're using names of God that are not typical names of God, did you swear an oath to God or did you not? Right? That's what this next passage is about. So if you use that name of God, and sometimes when we're being respectful and we don't want to use God's name in vain, even in an educational context, we would say Adoshem, where we change it a little bit and we make it clear that we're talking about the name of God without disrespecting God by using his name unnecessarily. So when I say that name, I will change it to Adoshem. Likewise, when we talk about a different name of God, and that note is that name, by the way, is already a replacement for the 4-letter name of God, which is spelled Yud Vav, right? Followed by the Yud Hey. Yud Hey Vav Hey. Yud Hey Vav Hey. But that's the four-letter name of God that we never pronounce, and Jews will never say. You could sound out what those letters spell. We don't even normally say the letters. We change it to Yud K Vav K, right? So that name connotes the merciful aspect of God. And then the name, again, you could talk about a judge, right? And say Eloheinu, or my judges. But normally that word, we change it to Elokeinu, and it refers to the name of God, which connotes God's aspect of judgment, of strict judgment. Okay, but we would normally, instead of pronouncing the name, we would change it a little bit and say Elokeinu, again, out of respect to God. Okay, so if one administered the oath to the witnesses in the name of Adoshem, or in the name of Yud K Vav K, the tetragrammaton, or in the name of the Almighty, right? The Almighty, which refers to Shaddai, in the name of Lord of Hosts, Tsevaot, or in the name of the gracious and compassionate one, or in the name of he who is slow to anger, in the name of he who is abounding in loving kindness, or in the name of any of the appellations of God, even though he did not mention the ineffable name of God, the four-letter name of God, the Yud K Vav K, these witnesses would be liable for taking a false oath of testimony, because it was clear as day that they were taking an oath before God and they were referring to God. Therefore, if they swore falsely while employing the name of God, you can see why that would be a big sin and would trigger this liability. Now, related matter, one who curses God employing any of these names or appellations of God is liable to be executed through stoning. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. That's a minority view. The majority, the rabbis, overrule him and would deem such a person exempt, as they hold that one is liable for cursing God only if he employs the ineffable name of God, the tetragrammaton. One who curses his mother or father, employing any of these names or appellations of God, is liable to be executed through stoning. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, and the rabbis deem him exempt, as they hold that one is liable for cursing his father and his mother only if he employs the ineffable name of God. One who curses himself or another, employing any of these names or appellations of God, violates a prohibition. If one says, the Lord God shall strike you, Deuteronomy 28:22, and likewise, if one says, God shall strike you if you do not come to testify, that is a curse that is written in the Torah, and in such a case, one is certainly liable if he fails to testify. If one says to the witnesses, God shall not strike you, or God shall bless you, or God shall benefit you if you come and testify, Rabbi Meir deems him liable, as one may infer from that statement that if he fails to testify, God will strike him or will not bless him or benefit him. And the rabbis deem him exempt because the curse is not explicitly stated. Now, it's not that a person, who employs this blessing will guarantee bring blessing to the one who testifies, or if one curses such a person, that will bring down a curse on that person. But what he has done is he's brought God into the conversation, and if the person is lying when he actually knows testimony, that he is obligated to speak in court, but he's trying to get out of it, and now the plaintiff is saying, you'll be blessed or you'll be cursed, and he employs God's name in that, and then the person says, yeah, I'm not coming. I don't know anything. So it's going to be deemed that he did swear an oath, before God, because God's name has now been brought into the conversation. And if he's claiming that, no, I don't know anything, right, that this could be now characterized as an oath of testimony, or at least that's the question. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah taught that let's just go. The Mishnah taught that if the plaintiff said to the witnesses, I administer an oath to you, or I command you, or I bind you, these witnesses are liable. If they then say, we don't know anything, or answer amen, they would be taking a false oath of testimony. I adjure you just like I bind you or I command you in the name of God, right? So the Gemara asks, what is the plaintiff saying? He merely said that he is administering an oath, but he did not say in the name of what he is administering the oath. He didn't say, I administer an oath to you in the name of God, right? He only said, I administer an oath to you. Is that enough to create an oath of testimony? Rabbi Yehuda said, this is what the plaintiff is saying. I administer an oath to you with the oath that is mentioned in the Torah. Or I command you with the command that is mentioned in the Torah. Or I bind you with the bond that is mentioned in the Torah. And in the Torah, all of these include mention of the name of God, and therefore an oath is created if the witness swears falsely. Abaye said to Rabbi Yehuda, but according to that interpretation, concerning that which Rabbi Chia teaches, that if the plaintiff said to the witnesses, I chain you, these witnesses are liable for taking a false oath of testimony. Is chaining written in the Torah? Apparently the reference in the Mishna and the Baraisa is not to similar language in the Torah. So rather, Abaye said that this is what the plaintiff is saying. I administer an oath to you with an oath. I command you with an oath. I bind you with an oath. I chain you with an oath. But all these verbs are referring to the oath of testimony, which is specifically mentioned in the Torah. Now the Mishnah teaches if one administered the oath to the witnesses in the name of Adoshem, or in the name of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the four-letter name, or in the name of El Shaddai, which is a better way to say it, right? Which we would translate as the Almighty, or in the name of the Lord of Hosts, in the name of the gracious and compassionate one, in the name of he who is slow to anger, or in the name of he who is abounding in loving kindness, which are all appellations of God. We recite these, right, on holidays when we speak 3 times, right, the 13 attributes of God. These are all names of God. Gracious and compassionate, right? We know these are attributes that refer specifically to God, and when we're talking about the gracious and compassionate one, it's clear that we're speaking about God. Therefore, if they swore before the gracious and compassionate one that they don't have any knowledge, when in fact they do, they would be liable for taking a false oath. Asks the Gemara, is that to say that gracious and compassionate are sacred names? Just the adjectives, gracious and compassionate, does that always refer to God? But there are names of God that may be erased, and there are names of God that may not be erased due to their inherent sanctity. These are the names that may not be erased. For example, several variations of the name God, like Elohim, or Kel, or Elokecha, where we're taking the name of God, and we would normally say Elokeinu, but with an H instead of the K, and then we could change the suffix, so instead of saying our God, which is what Elokeinu means, we could say, Elokecha, your God, right? Changing the suffix to, change first person, second person, third person about, whose God this is. Or just the simplest name of God, Kel, right? So with the second person singular suffix, or Elohim, or Elokehem, with a second person plural, or I shall be as I shall be, right? When Moses asked, what name shall I say when I come back, to Egypt and tell the elders of the Jewish people that God sent me, what name shall I use, right? And God said, you shall say, my name is I shall be as I shall be. This is definitely a name of God, right? Or Aleph Dalet, or Yud Kei, the Almighty, the Lord of Hosts. These names, if you write them down, because they are obviously proper names of God, you cannot erase them, right? You can't erase the name of God. That's why we don't, when a prayer book becomes damaged and is no longer usable, we don't just throw it in the trash, right, where it's going to get destroyed and it's going to be a disrespect to God's name. Rather, we put them in a geniza, right, so a place of holy books and holy writings that can no longer be used, and what they are is awaiting burial. Eventually, they're going to be buried, maybe alongside, a Jew who dies and is buried in a cemetery. Sometimes, used up, worn out prayer books are buried along with such a person. They require burial, just like a human does. But adjectives that describe the Holy One, blessed be He, for example, the great, the mighty, the awesome, the prodigious, the powerful, the courageous, the strong, or just gracious by itself, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness. right? These are adjectives that might be referring to God, might not. And so these may be erased. Apparently, gracious and compassionate are adjectives and not actual names of God. How then does an oath or a curse in the name of the gracious and compassionate take effect? And Abaye said, in the Mishnah, it is with regard to one who administers an oath or curses in the name of he who is gracious, right? When you make the full phrase, he who is gracious, or the gracious one, well, now we know we're talking about God. Or in the name of he who is compassionate. In these cases, the Tan of our Mishnah is stating the law. Although gracious and compassionate are not names of God in themselves, the reference in the Mishnah is to an oath in the name of God, and it's clear to all present that that's what happened. We're on page 35b. Rava said to Abaye, if so, in the case of one who administered the oath to the witnesses in the name of heaven and in the name of earth as well, say that it is with regard to an oath in the name of he for whom the heaven and the earth are his, that the Tan of our Mishnah is stating the law. Why then does the Tan of our Mishnah say that for an oath in the name of heaven and in the name of earth, these witnesses are exempt from liability? Well, the Gemara rejects this. How can these cases be compared? There, since there is no other entity that is called gracious and compassionate, certainly in the name of he who is gracious and certainly in the name of he who is compassionate, that we know we're talking about God. But by contrast, here, since there are heaven and earth that exist as independent entities, right? There's the earth, there is the earth. When we're talking about the earth, we're not necessarily talking about God, even when we're talking about heaven. Although often heaven is sort of capitalized and we kind of mean, that heaven will be my witness, right? Somebody is really saying as God is my witness. But if you're just talking about heaven generally as a concept, sometimes you just mean the sky. Sometimes you mean the afterworld, but you're not necessarily meaning God, God's self. But by contrast here, since there are heaven and earth that exist as independent entities, perhaps when the person administers an oath in the name of heaven and in the name of earth, it is in the name of the actual heaven and in the name of the actual earth that he is speaking, and not in the name of he for whom the heaven and the earth are his, and therefore that would not be specific enough to trigger liability for speaking a false oath, because it wasn't clear that we were making an oath in the name of God. New subject. Apropos the names of God that may be erased and those that may not be erased. The Gemara discusses the details of the matter, right? About when can we erase a name of God and when can we not. So the sages taught, if one wrote the letters Aleph Lamed from the name Elohim, or the Yud Hey from the Tetragrammaton, in other words, the first two letters of a longer name of God, this pair of letters and that pair of letters may not be erased, especially the Aleph Lamed from Elohim, because those letters form a complete word name of God, right? Kel. I'm changing the name a little bit, but that is a complete name of God. But if one wrote in the letters Shin Daled from Shaddai, or Aleph Daled from Adoshem, or Tzadi Beis from Tsevaos, then this may be erased, because it's not enough of a complete name of God, and it's a name of God that's at a lower level of sanctity than Elohim or Hashem. So Rabbi Yosei says the word Tsevaos may be erased in its entirety. It means hosts, right? Normally we don't call God hosts. We might call God the God of hosts, right? The commander of the heavenly legions. But when we just say the word hosts, that's not a name of God by itself. So that's why Rabbi Yosei says the word Tsevaos may be erased in its entirety, as God is called Tsevaos only in the context of the children of Israel, and it is not an independent name of God, as it is stated, and I shall bring forth my hosts, Tzivosai, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt in Exodus 7:4. Shmuel says the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, that this is enough of a name of God that we know we're talking about a name of God. And therefore, we can't erase it once it's written. The sages taught any letters that are ancillary to the name of God, whether as a prefix preceding the name or as a suffix completing the name, this addition may be erased. Okay, so preceding, prefix. How so? If one wrote the Yud K Vav K, the four-letter name of God, with the prefix lamed, which would mean to God, right? A lamed preposition is a prefix is actually a preposition, right? Meaning to the Lord. So the lamed may be erased, but the Yud K Vav K may not be. If you put a prefix base, right, or bet, some would say, then you could erase the bet, right, because it just changes the four-letter name from the Lord to now with the base in front of it, by the Lord. So the base may be erased. If you put a vav in front of the four-letter name of God, which would therefore mean and the Lord, right, v'Hashem, then the vav may be erased. Or if you put a mem in front of the four-letter name of God, meaning from the Lord, right, m'Hashem, so then the mem may be erased. If you put a prefix shin, meaning that the Lord, right, sh'Hashem, then you could erase the shin. Or if you put a hey in front of it, which would mean, right, like he Hashem, meaning is the Lord, so then the hey may be erased. So the Tetragrammaton with the phrase kaf, meaning like the Lord, right, ka Hashem, then you could erase the kaf, right? They gave all the examples, but it's the same principle in every case. What about succeeding it? What about a suffix, right? How so? If one wrote Elokeinu, meaning our Lord, so then the nun vav suffix may be erased. If you wrote Elokehem, meaning their Lord or their God, so then you could erase the suffix. Elokehem, meaning your God, in the plural, you could erase the kaf mem. Acherim say the suffix succeeding the name of God may not be erased, as the name of God to which it is appended already sanctified it and is considered as though it is part of the name. Rav Huna says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Acherim. And as we've learned elsewhere, Acherim refers to Rabbi Meir. New subject. Abraham, who cursed Nabos, Givas of Binyamin, Shlomo, meaning King Solomon, Daniel. This list of names is a mnemonic for the laws that follow. All names that could be understood as the name of God that are stated in the Torah with regard to Abraham, are sacred as referring to God, except for this name, which is non-sacred, as it is stated where God said, where Abraham is talking to people, not to God, and he says Adonai, and what he means is my lords, right? He's using a term of respect. I think this is when he's purchasing the location of the grave where he's going to bury Sarah, right? And he says, my lords, if I have found favor in your eyes, in Genesis 18:3. This is where the angels stop by to tell him, that they're coming to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and that he's going to have a child the following year, right? So in that passage, Abraham is not talking to God; he's talking about angels, and he's talking to them who have appeared to him in the guise of men. So he's not referring to God. So that particular use of the word Adonai is referring to Abraham's direct address to angels, not to God. Hanina, the son of the brother of Rabbi Yehoshua, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, in the name of Rabbi Elazar Hamodai, say, this also is sacred. And the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is that which Rabbi Yehuda says that Rav says? Hospitality according to guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. In accordance with whose opinion is that statement? It is in accordance with the opinion of that pair of Tanaim, Hanina, the son of the brother Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who understood that Abraham was speaking to God. In other words, Abraham knew that these angels are representatives of God and that they brought the divine presence with them. Oh, no. I'm sorry, that's not what he's saying. He thought that they were men, but he was a prophet who was already accustomed to having God present to him, right? He had conversations with God. So what's being said here is Abraham is having a conversation with God, And then these angels who come in the form of men, so he thinks that they are just guests who need hospitality. And even though he's having a conversation with God, he says, "Excuse me, God." And then he goes and talks to these wayfarers, right? It turns out that they're angels and they are representatives of God, but Abraham doesn't know that at first. And so we're learning out that even when you have a conversation with God, if there are needy people on your doorstep, who need shelter and who need food, we learn from our ancestor Abraham that you would go and feed them. And so the mitzvah, the commandment of hospitality, is even greater than speaking to the divine presence. All names that could be understood as the name of God that are stated in the Torah with regard to Lot, Abraham's nephew, are non-sacred and are referring to angels, except for this one, which is sacred, as it is stated, and Lot said to them, "Please, not so, Adoshem, behold, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have magnified your mercy that you have performed for me by saving my life." It is apparent from the context that Lot is addressing he who has the capacity to kill and to revive. That is the Holy One, blessed be He. At a certain point, Lot realizes that he's speaking with angels, but in that particular verse, he is speaking to God, not to those angels. All names that are stated with regard to Navos are sacred. For example, in the verse, Navos blasphemed Elohim and the king in 1 Kings 21:13. And those names stated with regard to the prophet Micah are non-sacred and are referring to the graven image that he fashioned. See Judges chapter 17 and 18, not the prophet Micah. This was the wicked Micah. We've discussed that difference before. Rabbi Eliezer says, indeed, all names that are stated with regard to Navos are sacred, but those stated with regard to Micah, some of whom are non-sacred and some of whom are sacred. The names beginning with the letters Aleph Lamed, i.e. Elohim, are non-sacred, as the reference is to the idol that he crafted, and all the names beginning with the letters Yud He, right, the Tetragrammaton, are sacred, except for this name that begins with the letters Aleph Lamed, Elohim, and is sacred all the time that the house of Elohim was in Shiloh in Judges 18:31. All names that are stated in the passage of Givas of Benjamin, where the rest of the tribes consulted God to determine whether they should go to war against the tribe of Benjamin. This was a story about a civil war in Judges chapter 20. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, they are non-sacred as they were consulting an idol, not God. Rabbi Yehoshua says they are sacred because they were speaking with God. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yehoshua, how can you say that those names are sacred? Does God promise and not fulfill the promise? Twice the tribes received the response to go to war against Benjamin, and twice they were vanquished. Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, that which God promised, he fulfilled. In each case, he responded to their question. The first time they consulted God through the Urim V'Tumim, right, which is held by the high priest in the Holy Temple or in the tabernacle before the Holy Temple was built, which is a way to consult with God about questions like, shall we go to war or not? But they did not seek to ascertain if they are to triumph in the war or if they are to be defeated. In the last time that they consulted God through the Urim V'Tumim, where they sought to ascertain whether they would emerge triumphant, they consented in heaven to their endeavor, as it is stated, and Pinchas, the son of Elazar, son of Aaron, was standing before it in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, go up, as tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand, in Judges 20:28. I'm almost done. So questions or comments, please get them in now. I'm going to just read a little bit longer than I normally would when I call for questions, because Nina is going to have to, if there are questions, print them out and bring them to me. As I explained at the top of the show, I'm struggling a little here today because the Wi-Fi and the internet is out in our whole neighborhood. I'm using a cellular connection. Hopefully it's still working, but I can't monitor comments the way I normally do. I can't receive the document where Nina normally passes me the questions. So if there are questions or comments, get them in now. Okay. All mentions of the name Shlomo, this refers to King Solomon, that are stated in the Song of Songs, such as the Song of Songs that is Shlomo's in Song of Songs 1:1. They are not references to King Solomon. Rather, they are sacred, meaning a song to the one for whom peace is his. Shehashalom. Right? We're not talking about Shlomo, we're talking about the one who creates peace in the world, meaning God. So these references, which one might have thought are to King Solomon, are actually references to God, God's self, except for this one mention where he says, my vineyard, which is mine, is before me. You, Solomon, shall have the 1,000, i.e. 1,000 are for Solomon himself, and 200 are for those who guard its fruit in Song of Songs 8:12. This is a reference to the sages. And some say this verse 2 is non-sacred. Behold the bed of Solomon, 60 mighty men are around it. Song of Songs 3:7. This is in keeping with the idea that the Song of Songs plays on many different levels, allegorical, metaphoric levels. It's an incredibly mystical book in the Bible. And it's not just a love song between a shepherd and a shepherdess. It's very much a mystical dialogue between God and the Jewish people. The Gemara asks, does this mean this verse 2 is non-sacred, and it is not necessary to say that the verse cited earlier is non-sacred? But that which Shmuel, the sage Shmuel, says, a monarchy that kills one of every 6 individuals in the world is not punished for doing so, as that is the prerogative of a monarch. As it is stated, my vineyard, which is mine, is before me. You, Shlomo, shall have the 1,000. That is a reference to the monarchy of heaven. And 200 for those who guard its fruit. This is a reference to the monarchy of earth. Again, allegorical, metaphorical. So of the 1,200 mentioned in the 2 parts of the verse, 200 or 1/6 are the prerogative of the earthly monarch. Shmuel, who interrupts the mention of Shlomo in this verse as referring to God, holds neither in accordance with the opinion of the first Tana nor in accordance with the opinion introduced with the term some say. So both sages, the Tanaim, agree that the reference in the verse is to Solomon and not to the Holy One, blessed be he. So rather, Shmuel cites a different version of the opinion introduced with the term some say, according to which this is what it is saying. And some say this Shlomo that appears in the verse with regard to 1,000 is sacred, and that Shlomo that appears in the verse with regard to the bed of Solomon is non-sacred, and it is Shmuel who states his opinion in accordance with the opinion introduced with the term some say. All kings that are stated with regard to the book of Daniel are non-sacred, except for this one, which is sacred, where the verse states, you, O king, king of kings, unto whom the God of heaven has given you the kingdom, the power and the strength and the glory, in Daniel 2:37. And some say this too is sacred, as it is stated, my Lord, the dream shall be for your enemy, and its interpretation for your foe, in Daniel 4:16. So to whom is Daniel saying this? If it enters your mind that when Daniel says my Lord, he is speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, that he is saying it, his enemy, who are they? They are the Jewish people. Would Daniel curse the Jewish people who are the enemy of Nebuchadnezzar? And the first Tana, who understands that Daniel is referring to Nebuchadnezzar, holds, are there Jewish enemies for Nebuchadnezzar and there are no Gentile enemies for him? It wasn't that the only enemies of Nebuchadnezzar were the Jewish people. Daniel was cursing the Gentile enemies, not the Jewish enemies. And that's where we will stop today. And if there are questions or comments, Nina will hand them to me. Flying in by way of the kitchen door.
Couldn't print because there's no Wi-Fi.
Ah, yes. Very good. Okay, so Nina is passing me a couple of questions. Okay, Bill. Speculating, but surely the occasions in which one would mention heaven and earth as a matched pair are not common, and are, at least in my limited experience, almost always religious or semi-religious. Would that not strongly suggest that it is a euphemism for God? Right, well, certainly if it was in the name of the creator of heaven and earth, right? When Moses says, I call on heaven and earth to witness, right? And he says that, right? He says, I call on heaven and earth to witness, that I'm speaking the blessings and curses in the name of God. But he's calling on heaven and earth to witness, not calling on God to witness. So I think it's all a question of context, and particularly when you say something like heaven and earth, because there are plenty of idolatrous, ways to say something like that. Right, the idolaters in the ancient world worship the earth as a separate god, worship the stars in heaven certainly as gods, and maybe heaven itself as a kind of god. So I take your point. If it said like in the name of heaven and earth, there might be a context where we would get that the person is swearing before God, but it sounds like unless it's the creator of heaven and earth by itself is not going to be enough to trigger liability for swearing a false oath if the plaintiff adjures the witnesses using only the terms heaven and earth. Bill also says, as a historical note, based on travel logs by Roman writers circa the 100s, the impression of outsiders was definitely that the default name of the God of Abraham was, I don't even know how to pronounce this, but spelled Saboath. They were incorrect, of course, but their misconception is revelatory in telling us which name of God they most commonly heard Jews using. Or Tzvaos, I guess you're talking about. So very interesting, very interesting. Thank you for that. And Ilanit says, with regard to the fact that we have no internet in the neighborhood and we're streaming by cellular, way to go above, around, and beyond. As ever, AT Daily is setting such a great example for dedication and joy in Torah in every circumstance. Kol HaKavod. Thank you so much, Ilanit. And Kol HaKavod to everyone who's tuning in. And if the stream is a little slow or low resolution than normally and you're just putting up with it, Kol HaKavod to you, my holy sisters and brothers. It's great that we can keep it going. And, and a big thanks and honor to all of you whenever we have to switch the time, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to broadcast and you guys tune in. And especially, as I mentioned, every Saturday night in the summer when, I can only go live at 9:45 or even 10 at night. And my East Coast people at 1 a.m. are just starting a class and learning Torah at 1 a.m. I'm just so blown away. I'm always blown away by that. That's what I've got for us today. And also, please pray for Bill's success in his job search. So let us all beseech Hashem, the Holy One, that our dear friend Bill should find the position that he is seeking at the right time, in the right place, in the right way, with the right people. And we all say Amen. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers, and God willing, I'll see you tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, with Wi-Fi restored, please, and our normal streaming setup. All the best. Have a great night.